Welcome, traveler. Step inside and out of the cold. You have found your way to the Midgard Archives, a place where the hearth fire never quite goes out and the shadows of the past are kept safe. I am glad you are here. Tonight, we are setting aside the noise of the modern world to look at the truth of the North. Find a comfortable spot, let the darkness settle around you, and let the flickering light of history guide you. Tonight, we peel back the layers of legend to find the man who stood at the end of an era. Our journey begins now. The year is 1066. A cold, damp fog clings to the banks of the River Derwent in northern England. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and the metallic tong of iron. Across the narrow wooden planks of Stamford Bridge stands a man who is a mountain of scars and stories. He is 7 feet tall, dressed in a coat of mail that shimmers like dark dragon scales in the weak autumn light. His name is Harald Sigurdsson, but history will remember him by another name, Hardrada, the Hard Ruler. Welcome back to the Midgard Archives. Tonight, we close the final chapter of our series, The Real Vikings, Myth versus Manuscript. We are witnessing the end of an era. The sun is setting on the age of the longship and the axe, and at the center of the storm stands the last true Viking king. Close your eyes. Let the sounds of the modern world fade. Imagine the heavy weight of a gold-hilted sword in your hand and the smell of the salt spray on a cold wind. We are going to the end of the world. To understand the man standing on that bridge in England, we must travel back 36 years to the year 1030. The Viking world was in a state of violent transition. The old gods, Odin and Thor, were receding into the shadows of the deep forests, replaced by the white Christ and the stone churches of the south. Harald was only 15 years old, a prince of Norway, fighting alongside his half-brother, King Olaf Haraldsson, at the Battle of Stiklestad. The manuscripts tell us that Olaf was a man of the new faith, seeking to unite Norway under one god and one crown. But the peasant army of the north rose against him. In the chaos of the shield wall, Olaf was cut down. Harald, a boy who should have been learning the ways of the hall, instead learned the ways of the blade. He was wounded and broken, watched his brother die, and was forced to flee into the dark, silent wilderness of the eastern forests. This is where the lore of the last Viking begins. Harald did not die in the mud of Stiklestad. He crawled through the brush, hiding from his enemies, until he reached the court of Prince Yaroslav, the wise in Kiefan Rus. It was here, in the vast riverlands of the east, that the boy became a man. He served Yaroslav as a captain, fighting in the endless wars of the steppes. But even then, his eyes were turned toward a greater horizon. He was a prince in exile, a warrior without a kingdom. And he knew that to win back Norway, he would need more than just courage. He would need gold. He would need a legend. Harald traveled further than any Viking of his generation. He followed the great rivers south, through the heart of Russia, until the horizon opened up to reveal the greatest city in the world, Midgard, the great city, Constantinople. To a young man from the timber halls of the north, the white marble walls and golden domes of Constantinople must have seemed like a dream of Valhalla itself. But Harald was not there as a tourist. He joined the Varangian Guard, the elite, axe-wielding bodyguards of the Byzantine emperors. The manuscripts of the Greeks describe these Northmen as winebags who fought like lions. They were the emperor's human iron, the men who stood closest to the throne. because they were foreigners who could not be bought by local politics. Harald rose through the ranks until he became the leader of this legendary guard. The lore of Harald's time in the East is filled with the echoes of his brutality and his brilliance. He fought in the deserts of North Africa. He campaigned in the rocky hills of Sicily. He even led his men to the gates of Jerusalem to protect pilgrims on his way to the Holy Sepulchre. In every battle, Harald took his share of the spoils. This was the polietus verf, the palace plunder. Legend says that every time an emperor died, the Varangians were allowed to walk through the imperial treasury and take as much as they could carry. Harald did this 3 times. He accumulated a fortune that was said to be greater than the wealth of any king in Europe. But Harald was not just a mercenary. He was a poet. Between the battles he wrote verses to Elisiv, the daughter of Prince Yaroslav, whom he had left behind in the north. He wrote of his longing for the cold fjords and the girl with the golden hair, even as he stood under the scorching sun of the Mediterranean. It is a rare glimpse into the soul of the hard ruler, a man who was as comfortable with a quill as he was with a Danax. In the year 1044, Harald decided it was time to return home. But the emperor did not want his best general to leave. The manuscripts tell a thrilling story of Harald's escape. He was thrown into prison, but he broke out, allegedly with the help of a noblewoman who had fallen in love with him. He stole 2 galleys and sailed them toward the Black Sea. When they reached the great chain that blocked the harbor, Harald ordered all his men to move to the back of the ships to lift the prows over the chain, then rush to the front to slide them across. He escaped the City of Gold with his life and his legendary treasure. He returned to Scandinavia not as a beggar, but as a titan. He reached an agreement to rule Norway with his nephew, Magnus the Good. But when Magnus died shortly after, Harald became the sole king of Norway. This is when he truly became Hardrada. He was a ruler of hard counsel. He'd seen the absolute power of the Byzantine emperors, and he brought that iron will back to the north. He crushed the rebellious lords of the uplands. He burned the villages of those who refused to pay his taxes. He founded the city of Oslo as a fortress for his power. He was a king who ruled by fear and by law. A man who believed that a kingdom was not a gift, but a prize to be held with a closed fist. As you sink deeper into the shadows of the archives, imagine the North Sea in the autumn of 1066. Harald was now an old man by Viking standards, 50 years old, but his ambition had not dimmed. He looked toward England, a land he believed was his by right of a treaty made years before. He teamed up with Tostig Godwinson, the rebellious brother of the English king Harald Godwinson. Together, they gathered a fleet of 300 ships. It was the last great gathering of the Viking dragon ships. The omens were dark. The manuscripts tell of Harald's dreams before the voyage. He saw a great witchwife riding a wolf, feeding the bodies of his men to the carrion birds. He saw the elk of the fjords covered in blood. But Harald Hardrada did not believe in omens. He believed in the steel of his mailcoat, which he called Emma. He believed in the strength of his arms and the gold in his chests. The invasion began with a victory at Fulford Gate. The Vikings crushed the northern earls and took the city of York. But their triumph was short-lived. King Harold of England had marched his army north with a speed that defied belief. He covered 200 miles in just 4 days, catching the Vikings completely by surprise. On September 25th, the sun was hot, and the Vikings had left their heavy chainmail back at their ships, several miles away. They were resting near Stamford Bridge, expecting a peaceful handover of hostages. Instead, they saw the glint of sunlight on thousands of English spears emerging from the dust. The Battle of Stamford Bridge is the funeral pyre of the Viking Age. The lore tells of a single Viking giant, a man whose name is lost to time, who stood alone on the bridge. He held back the entire English army for an hour, felling 40 men with his axe. He was only killed when an English soldier floated under the bridge in a tub and thrust a spear through the gaps in the planks. Once the bridge was taken, the slaughter began. Harald Hardrada fought with a fury that belonged to the age of his ancestors. He moved ahead of his line, swinging his sword with both hands, cutting through shields and helms like they were parchments. For a moment it seemed as though the last Viking might actually win. But then a stray arrow struck him in the throat. As the hard ruler fell to the grass, the spirit of the north fell with him. The Viking Age did not die because the men grew weak. It died because the world had moved on. The time of the individual hero, the wandering sea king, and the axe cult was being replaced by the time of knights, heavy cavalry, and organized kingdoms. Harald Hardrada was the last of his kind, a man who could trace his lineage to the gods and his goal to the ends of the earth. Think of the silence that followed the battle. Of the 300 ships that sailed to England, only 24 were needed to carry the survivors back to Norway. The longships were rotted. The treasure was spent. The dragon heads were taken down from the prows, and the axes were put away in the dark corners of the barns. The north became a land of stone churches and silent farms. As you drift toward sleep, imagine the spirit of the last Viking. Here's a silhouette against a setting sun, his long hair matted with the salt of 1,000 voyages. He is the last echo of the thunder. The Midgard Archives are settling for the night. The manuscripts of the kings are being laid to rest on the stone shelves. You are safe in the stillness of the present. The thunderbolt of the north has fallen, and the echoes of the battle have faded into the whisper of the wind. The fjords are quiet now. The stars over the River Derwent are the same stars that watch over you tonight. They are cold, distant, and peaceful. The long night is your sanctuary. The struggle for the crown is over. The last king has found his peace. Sleep now, in the shadow of the last great voyage. Sleep with the knowledge that the end of one story is only the beginning of another. The Midgard Archives are closing. The night is yours. Wealth dies. Kinsmen die. But the name of the hard ruler remains. Sleep, sleep, sleep.